funny, isn't it, a fairy tale? You know, I arrived in the room thinking, okay, I'll just tell the next bit of this story that I know so well, but it rearranges psychic space. Stories, they rearrange psychic space around us. They open things up in us. So I'm going to take a bit of time myself now and think about what that story still has to say directly to me. Hello there and welcome to Jawbone. Last time we were together, we were deep in that wonderful fairy tale Tatterhood. I got us about 2/3 of the way through. I speculated on whatever was occurring to me at the time, and now we're going to get to the conclusion of this extraordinary story. Now, the way etiquette is displayed as a storyteller, if you tell a story in two halves, or several parts actually, is you don't just leather into the next part without some preamble. So what I'm going to have to do is, in a truncated fashion, take us to the beginning of the story and get us back in a couple of minutes to the point we were when we took the break. Okay, shall we go? Let's go. Shall we go? Let's go. Shall we go? Let's go. You remember I'm clearly playing a drum. The clinging sound is the ring. We remember a king and a queen who were kind to all but could not conceive a child. We remember their niece meeting a girl at the very edge of the forest, playing with the golden ball, bringing back the grandmother with the advice they needed. Preserve the water from your bath, make love in the furthest hut, and in the morning there will be a red and a white flower. Consume the white flower, you will have the child you desire. Well, we remember that is exactly what happened, but she also ate the red flower, didn't she? And so there are two different energies growing in the great grail of her belly. We remember that when the children were born, the first one roared out into this world on the back of a goat with a spoon, with a tattered hood over half her face. And then a rather more predictable but lovely little girl comes straight afterwards. We remember, don't we, that at adolescence, when they were going to be sending off the fairest maid or the fair sister to audition or be auditioned or generally audition for the business of marriage, all those strange characters came and gathered round the castle. This is terrible what I'm doing, by the way. You must go back and listen to the first part first if you haven't heard it already. I'm not doing it due diligence. We remember that Tatterhood charged amongst them, and we remember that the sister's head was taken from her body, the calf head. And Tatterhood said actually she's been taken to the longhouse of the old women, the wild old women, for some sort of initiatory purpose, and she seems to be safer there than what you were about to do to her. And we are off on a girl's adventure. So they borrowed their dad's boat. They went over the first loch. They went over the second loch or fjord. And then they saw, this is just roughly where we got to, they saw the hut of the wild old women. And the fair sister stays in the boat, which is very nearby, and Tatterhood makes her way down. And she looks through the windows, and sure enough, there's the old girls, and they're having a great time. There's a tattoo parlour down one end. There's a sort of an informal choir down the other. People are smoking and dancing and weaving and poeticizing and writing books and arm wrestling and whatever else the women do in the women's hut. And I wouldn't know because I'm not there, not allowed to be there. So Tatterhood bursts in. Sure enough, as predicted, hanging off an old rusty nail is her sister's head. You would notice if you looked at the hair that there are 3 strands of silver coming down from it, which indicates that she may have been there for longer than the story is presenting. Well, she plucks the head, her sister's head, off the nail. She runs out into the unconsecrated darkness back to the boat, pulls the calf's head off her sister, and conveniently there's a headless calf passing at that time that really needed a head. Puts her sister's head back on her head and says, right, how are you doing? And she says, well, that was a funky old time in that women's hut. I learnt things. I have received nutrition. I have received certain wisdoms. I've received 10,000 secrets. Good, says Tatterhood. Now, this is an important, pivotal part of the story. Do you want to go back on the boat, back to your old life, back to Bjorn and Sigurd and all the guys you're meant to be marrying? Or do you want to carry on collecting stories on our boat and seeing where the wind takes us? So, this is a Thelma and Louise moment, The 2 of them elect to carry on. How glorious is that? It is an amazing time for the 2 of them. They are, because now she's got her 3 strands of silver, she can tell stories too. It's not always on Tatterhood's shoulders. So the 2 sisters are sort of evening out in terms of the imaginative ground they inhabit. It's taken a bit of the pressure off Tatterhood, occurs to me now. Well, wherever they go, stories are attracted to them, and the stories kind of hang off the boat like kind of animal hides off the sails, But one day they head north, and when they get to this northern kingdom, you must understand by now Tatterhood is extraordinarily famous. The Beatles arriving in America in the 60s is as for nothing as for the fame of Tatterhood. And so, she's there, kids are waving, and they've all thousands of little girls who've got spoons, mate, and she's signing autographs and, selfies and all of that kind of stuff. But watching them arrive with great excitement is the king of this northern kingdom. Now, the king is a widow, and when he sees the maiden with the 3 strands of silver in her hair, he feels a murmuration in his heart that he did not ever expect to feel again. It had been some years since his wife had died, and he had just resigned himself to that was a wonderful, earlier, once-in-a-lifetime experience, the process of falling in love, and was resigned to never getting near it again. So this kind of throws him when this young woman turns up with Tatterhood. And of course, Tatterhood is a glory. So the 2 of them are invited into the castle, and they're afforded all the pleasantries and luxuries you may expect. But this thing has happened, this really unexpected thing has happened, is that the king, he's absolutely ancient. He's like 53 years old. Can you bear it? He's so antique. He realizes that he actually, as he gets to know her, wants to propose marriage to the maiden with the 3 strands of silver in her hair. So he knows in the etiquette of the time that you have to ask the older sister first if this is okay. And Tatterhood is a kind of chaperone, and she is 2 minutes older. So he goes to Tatterhood and he says, look, I am woefully in love with your sister. I write her bad love poetry. She seems to like it, What do you think? Could I marry her? And Tatterhood said, sure, I think that's possible. But older sisters marry first where we come from, my liege. And he says, well, of course, who would you have in mind? And she said, well, your son. I haven't told you about his son yet, but his son was a brooding, very good-looking chap. Everybody had an eye on the son. Everybody, as the Irish would say, had a graw for the boy. A bit of a crush. He didn't say much, which women really loved because they thought it meant he was complicated. It wasn't complicated exactly, he was just kind of quiet. But she said, I like the lad. I like the lad. And he said, yeah, I bet you do. Everybody likes the lad. So the lad has got to marry you if I'm to marry your sister. And she said, yes, I think that would be appropriate. So he takes his boy for a walk and he says, have I ever really asked anything of you before? And the boy says, you have not. And he says, well, today is the day that all the crows come to roost on your house. You may have ambitions. I don't know if there's a Brunhilde in the village or someone you're in love with, but how would you fancy marrying Tatterhood? Because I can't marry her sister, and you know I'm in love with her, without Tatterhood marrying too. And the son displays extraordinary class at this moment, where he says, well, I was there when you buried Mum, and I saw you ride a horse made entirely of tears for the next few years. If you could find love in this world, in your dotage, in your antiquity, that would be such an extraordinary thing. I could only put my shoulder to such a possibility. And I got to say, I'm kind of intrigued with Tatterhood. You don't meet a girl like that every day. What is the spoon about? What is all of this about? And he says, well, I feel great pride and a little bit of trepidation at your decision, but I'm going to jog on now and tell the maiden with 3 strands of silver in her hair that we can marry, tell Tatterhood, and all will be well. And so that is what happened. Now, I don't know if you've ever fantasized about getting married. And if you did fantasize about getting married, I would be almost certain that part of that fantasy was not getting married in the same ceremony that one of your parents did. But this is what is going to happen. They're all going to marry on the same day in this little chapel. And imagine the scene. Up ahead on 2 horses is the maiden with the 3 strands of silver and the king. There they are, gorgeous, going together. So I never thought of that, actually. Yeah, he's not meeting her in the church. They're riding together to the church. And then behind them, the lad is on a horse, the son, and next to him on the goat is beloved Tatterhood with the tattered hood. She's waving her spoon. And she says something like this to the lad. The trouble with men is that you have forgotten the questions to ask a woman to open her soul towards you. You have forgotten the questions. And so my dowry to you, my gift to you, in fact, will be to give you the questions you need to ask me to open up my own soul. Well, the lad was young, but he recognized this was a streak of pure generosity. And he said, I would be delighted to know what questions to ask you. Tell me, what is it? And she said, well, let's start with the goat, shall we? Why on earth am I riding this goat? And he said, I don't know, why are you riding the goat? And with that, she entered the ritual triad of her responses. She said, for one with eyes to behold it, this is not a goat at all. This is a Castilian steed. And suddenly, right there and then, after the briefest shimmer in the air, she was riding a black Castilian horse. Black saddle, black bridle, steam from its nostrils, glorious swishing tail. It was quite the upgrade. Well, the lad is sort of amazed because suddenly she's at his height and she's moving along on the horse, but she's still got the spoon and she's still got the tattered hood. And he says, extraordinary. She says, okay, second question. Why is it that I'm always waggling my spoon about? What's that all about? And he said, I was frightened to ask, what is the spoon about? Why do you carry it with you everywhere you go? And she said, well, for one with eyes to behold it, it is not a spoon at all. It is a wand. And then again, there was a sort of shimmer in the air, and in front of her, she didn't have a spoon anymore. It was a rowan wand with a little tip of antler bone on the very end. And he said, I like the way this is turning out. And she said, okay, third question, most important question of all. The other questions were preambles to this question. Why is it I process through life with a tattered hood covering half my face? And he said, I don't know. I don't know. Why do you go through life like that? And she said, because for one with eyes to behold it, it is not a tattered hood at all. It is a crown of wild flowers. And the air shimmered for the third time, and there on her head, sure enough, was this incredible crown of all the flowers of the hedgerows and the meadows, and her hair cascading down her back. And she looked at him in all her ordinary beauty, and he was looking at the sky woman of the dawn. He was looking at the face he would love his whole life. For one with eyes to behold it, it is not a goat at all, it is a steed. For one with eyes to behold it, it is not a spoon, it is a wand. For one with eyes to behold it, it is not a tattered hood at all, it is a crown of wild flowers. Well, it was quite the ceremony. The rumour is that the midwife from the beginning of our story was brought in to help conduct it. She was a very, very small woman. And the rumour is that the oldest man in this northernmost country, who was also incredibly small and incredibly ancient, was brought in to preside over the male bit of the whole affair. And you know what? Once the midwife clapped eyes on the old sprig of a man, they fell in love and proceeded to get married at the end of the marriage of the other lot. What have we learned? Never give up on love, never give up on love, never give up on love. It's never too late. Oh, the celebration. Oh, the feasting. Oh, the great loquacious carnival of it all. People danced and they wept and they forgave each other. And then they toasted and they ate a little more and then they rested. It's always good to have a nap at a wedding. And then they revived with little espressos that were made by myself. And then there was some storytelling. And then there was yet more dancing. And they say truly that first on the dance floor was Tatterhood and her young husband. And they say if you glimpsed her from one angle, I'm afraid you still saw the goat on occasion. You may have even seen the tattered hood or the spoon. Occasionally over the thump of the Clash and the Ramones and Luscious Jackson and whoever else they were listening to, you might have heard, mate, mate, mate. And then other times she was in all her new shape, depending on how she felt at the time. Well, all I know is as far as I know, to that country that is both inside us and somewhere else entirely, to this day, Tatterhood, her husband, are now the king and queen of that place, and they preside over everyone and are loved by all. And as the poets say, where they place their hands, the water is sweet for 50 miles. And at the centre of their life is great and generative energy. I'm wondering what it would be like to ride alongside through life where somebody really sees you, and what other people would see as a goat, they do see a beautiful horse, or this strange thing that you waggle around in this hand, this passion that you have is actually beautiful. And of course, as I think about it now, a wand is something that directs and creates things according to fairy tale traditions. You can make things, you're a creator, you're not just a chaos monger. And then, of course, the tattered hood. I mean, we're all carrying tattered hoods, aren't we? You know, it's always difficult for our whole face to be seen. I had to tell thousands of fairy tales. I had to put myself through the scrutiny of hundreds of audiences before I could allow my full character to emerge, because there's so many parts of us that are hidden away. You remember the line by Rilke I always give us, "Wherever I am folded, there I am a lie." And storytelling, the truthful aspect of storytelling, is often without the use of I. You begin to uncurl and locate your wingspan again. I love the little detail at the end about the midwife, the tiny midwife. In these stories, there's a mythic image we get when the fair maiden loses her head with the calf, and I talked about that in the last episode. But also when ancestors come in, like midwives, like Oben, when they get very, very small, that is a sign that the story is beginning to do strange things with time, and the story has become so efficacious and so beautiful that kind of emerging into our time are the old ones and the ancestors, and they want to get in on a wedding like that because it is good and generative for all. Weddings in stories like this are not just sort of petitioning that we should all be married. They are to do with certain equilibriums of the soul, certain quadrants of the psyche that find jumpy little accords with each other, and something starts to grow again. And when something starts to grow, you find a Tatterhood in your life. You find a little Hermes in your life. You find some irascible, gleeful, life-giving energy. My old mentor, Robert Bly, many of ours really, would always say there's a difference between life-preserving and life-giving. Life-preserving is okay and it's better than nothing, but it doesn't have, to use that word again, I've used a few times, but it doesn't have the glee. It doesn't have the push. It doesn't have the chutzpah that we actually need. It doesn't have the pugnaciousness that we need to move through life and create life where we go. So I hope you enjoyed that rather strange telling of Tatterhood. Again, very different to what I would do if you actually turned up and I was telling it in front of you. One thing to say, if you decide to tell Tatterhood yourself, enjoy, please, what I've been up to. But the challenge for storytelling is not to ever replicate the language or turn of phrases of another storyteller. Look at the bones of the story. Go and read it in a fairy tale book, and bit by bit by bit, uncover what the story is saying directly to you, not to you just through me or somebody else. Stories have, or storytelling actually to be more acute, has something in it called the sense and the matter. Now the matter of the story is what Tatterhood looks like on a page, but the sense of the story is all the twists and the turns and the amplifications and the humour and the drops and the pathos that one storyteller gives that is unique to them. That's where their originality lives. That's where their artistry lives. And it's not in the oral tradition. You're not to be stealing that from others. You're not to be putting that in your pocket and thinking you're carrying on a tradition. The thing to do is to be inspired by it. And as I say, find your own way into it. And then you will be on an adventure far, far more ultimately nourishing. So, well, wow. It's funny, isn't it, a fairy tale? I arrived in the room thinking, okay, I'll just tell the next bit of this story that I know so well, but it rearranges psychic space. Stories, they rearrange psychic space around us. They open things up in us. So I'm going to take a bit of time myself now and think about what that story still has to say directly to me.